Dave introduced me as David Harrelson. I'm a tribal member. I'm also the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Grand Ronde tribes. These are the homelands of the people of Grand Ronde. I know that very personally and very closely, so I'll share some of my family history with you. My grandmother is Ellen Fisher. She worked at Chemawa Indian School her whole life. Her father is Freeman Bean. Freeman Bean was the first tribal member in Western Oregon to own his own logging company. He made millions 3 times, and depending on who you ask, he either lost it all each time or he gave it away. His great-grandfather is Joseph Shengretta. Joseph Shengretta in the 1840s attended Jason Lee's Methodist mission, and in the 1850s he signed the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 that provided for the removal of the Kalapuya people to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. That's who my ancestors are. Joseph Shengretta went on the reservation to be a headman of the Marys River Kalapuya people, and those are the people from this place. And among all those people, someone that you need to know is the name William Hartless. And William Hartless, a Marys River Kalapuya man, was interviewed by ethnographers from the Smithsonian, and he told a lot of the history of this place and spoke about it. So today that bike ride, that started at that point, that name is provided by that man. So it's an important person to know. When I think about place and I think about something and reclaiming place, putting a name on something like Lamprey, which a lot of people don't know what Lamprey is, and that's something that is sad to a lot of us tribal folks because it's something that's very important to us. But it's happy to see it, right? There's a lot of research that's occurring about Lamprey, and we're putting that forward. Lamprey are probably the only, how do I put this? Native people have been here a really long time. So have lamprey. As a fish, they're some of the oldest fish that have been in our rivers. And so if there's someone to share that story of connection in time to place with human beings, it's probably lamprey. So whether it's the flood stories that William Hartless talks about, where the people from this place escaped from the great floods that scientists call the Missoula floods today, or the Brett's floods. Lamprey was here then, just as people were here then. Our old stories tell us lots of things. They tell us about those floods, but they also tell us why this side of the Willamette River would be a great place to name Lamprey Creek. And that's partially because on the east side, we know that that's where the fish go when they get above Willamette Falls. And among any other place, we know from our stories that when those fish get above Willamette Falls, those salmon, they go up the Santiam River. They go some other places too, but that's the best place for fish to go. And that's a part of an obligation. So it's important to recognize that as Native people and just people of Oregon, there's an obligation between people and between fish, whether that's salmon or lamprey. And in order to fulfill that obligation, we have to know the lifespan, the life cycle of these animals, and we need to find a place for them in our society. So the importance of a naming event like this is immensely important from the tribal perspective. I'm really happy to be invited here today with all these wonderful people that are doing phenomenal work. I'm excited about the name Lamprey being here because of all the work that OSU has done with lamprey research, and so often being led by a partnership between our neighbors from upriver, the Umatilla, who have really shown Indian country that there's going to be scientific solutions to some of these problems that Indian country is facing with not being able to access our traditional foods like lamprey. And the leadership that Umatilla has taken in that is immensely important. I value it a great deal, and When I think about people that embody that, Umatilla, OSU, respecting place, respecting ancestors, people like Gabe Shioships come to mind. So when he asked me to be here today, there was no way I couldn't say no. So thank you very much, and thank you to the whole planning committee. And again, welcome to our homelands on behalf of the people of Grand Ronde.
Thank you, David. David's been a wonderful supporter of all things lamprey and native fisheries related to the Willamette River Basin. David's a strong protector of this culture and a very knowledgeable person. So we're standing in the very first lamprey creek in the United States. This is, as David said, this is a very special day. I want to again thank everybody for being here. Today is part of the second annual World Fish Migration Day. And so this is an international day to celebrate all things fish migration. So fish passage, fish reclaiming lost areas. And so we thought it would be a great time with lamprey. Lamprey have a lot of problems with kind of modern fish passage, dams, low-level dams, culverts, etc. And so right now I'd like to call up Ward 8 City Councilor Frank Hann. Come up and say a few words.
Given the weather, I'll make this as few as possible. When I left today, my wife says make sure you look up from time to time, but cell phones, my neck is stuck.
Is it to my show?
As David said earlier, all you Masi is thank you, and I really thank you all for being here, especially on a little bit of a gray day with a chance of rain. I want to thank all of you on behalf of Mayor Traber and the City Council of Corvallis. And I want to thank the sponsors of today's event, particularly the Confederate tribes of the Grande. And this is just another example of their generosity, their community involvement. Many of us don't, I didn't know this until I was doing a little research, but they're actually the 8th largest charitable organization in the state of Oregon for all the good works that they do. So, why all the big fuss about this tiny little tributary creek that we're here in Ward 8 today to celebrate with the Lamprey Creek Awakening? Well, Lamprey Creek has great aspirations. It's not only here, its waters flow into the slightly larger Oak Creek, which is a tributary to the larger Marys River. This is a tributary to the larger Willamette, and then of course, as we all know, it goes to the Columbia River and eventually to the Pacific Ocean. So this little stream has an important contribution to make. Also, this little creek is one of the few connections that our culture and our local community has with its past, its present, and its future. This creek has been here for almost 10,000 years. It's here now, and hopefully it'll be here in the future. Many other natural features in our community have been lost or are beyond recognition, and this creek represents a connection to those other areas in time. Second, it's important, just from a safety standpoint. There was an accident that occurred some time ago, and without a name or without a location on a map, it was very difficult for the police and the fire department to respond to the person who was in distress. Third, naming a creek gives a sense of place and caring. We tend to value those natural features more if they have a name. It also provides us with an image and a place that we can remember. So it's important that we name our creeks and to be careful and considerate in how we name them. So that brings us to the lamprey. So why all this fuss over a long eel-like fish that few of us have ever seen? There are plenty of creeks named after other fish. And why would we want to name a creek after the lamprey? Maybe it's because it's the oldest fish to inhabit our city. Maybe it's because it has a powerful impact culturally, spiritually, nutritionally for those who lived here for thousands of years. Maybe it's because the habitat of this ancient fish is at risk and its population is dangerously plummeting. Maybe it's because OSU has played a critical role in the studying of this fish. Maybe it's because a filmmaker from Corvallis made a signature film about the plight of the Pacific lamprey. Maybe it's because people simply cared enough about the lamprey to go through the process to make this happen. So for all this reason, and for the City of Corvallis and the City Council, I'd like to welcome you all and again accept it and recognize the naming of this creek. We're very grateful that the Confederate tribes, the Grande and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission are here to bless this creek and the lamprey therein. We're grateful for Lamprey Creek that provides us with sufficient quantity and quality of water to support the lamprey, the giant Pacific salamander, and other aquatic fauna that preceded us on this land. We're grateful that there are people in our area who care enough to protect this special waterway so the future generations of humans and lamprey can survive and flourish. From the City of Corvallis, thank you all for being here, for caring, and for all the work you do. And to the Pacific Lamprey, thank you for traveling on this journey with us.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank. Those were great words. So as Frank said, so Pacific lamprey are also important. You know, they have many ecological and cultural values. But Oregon State has played a strong role in the last 20 years of developing a lot of that Pacific lamprey research. And I think if God forbid, if a bolt lightning were to strike down on this spot right now, we would lose about 90% of our Pacific lamprey researchers. Folks like Steve Whitlock, Luke Schultz over there. I see Brian McElraith, Steve Starcevich, and of course, the person I'm going to bring up next, Dr. Carl Shrek. Dr. Carl Shrek was my major professor. He worked alongside folks like Hiram Lee to eventually bring in our final speaker, Dr. David Close. So Oregon State is the first mainstream university to actually develop a Pacific lamprey conservation plan. Oregon State kind of brought the issue of Pacific lamprey conservation mainstream. So that's another very important reason of why we're here today. Lamprey research is uber important. Lamprey are also, David, correct me if I'm wrong, we're very important to this tribal sustenance of the Grand Ronde tribe. Is unlike the Umatilla tribe, my tribe, which is mine and David tribes, which is further inland, salmon stocks weren't as abundant. So Pacific lamprey were super important to the tribal diets historically of the Kalapuyan people. So with that said, I'd like to bring up Dr. Carl Shrek.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Giving this talk in the rain, I see my notes running. Reminds me, I was lecturing in Nash Hall, and my notes started to run. I looked up, and there's a laboratory, which happens to be microbiology, that was dripping on me, so I had no clue what that was. But like Gabe says, we've been interested in lamprey for quite a while. And unfortunately, when I first got here, that was roughly 40 some odd years ago, I really didn't know very much about lamprey. In fact, we really didn't know very much, but there were some seminal people who had studied them. I snooped around and found out from Brian Zidlauskas, who's over here, runs a world-class fish collection actually on campus. The oldest specimen we have goes back 3/4 of a century. It's a Pacific lamprey that was collected in the Rogue River. And so ever since then, OSU's been involved in lamprey research. There's about 41 different species of lamprey in the world, take one or two. 2 of them in the southern hemisphere, the rest up here. And then there's more lamprey in the northwest than anywhere else on the planet. And it's hard to know, is that really true, or are there just more people studying lamprey here than anywhere else on the planet? But we have a lot, and we have 3 in the Willamette Basin. And we actually have 2 of them right here in Lamprey Creek. Many people think that all lamprey are parasitic, and that's not necessarily true. The big lamprey that we see very often, if you walk in a river and you see something like this, long, looks like an eel, those are parasitic lamprey, and they have the exact same life cycle as a Pacific salmon. They're born in fresh water, but the difference is the juveniles might hang out 8, 9, even 10 years in the rivers. They're buried in the sediment before they migrate out to the ocean. Spend a few years out there, then come back and spawn. Maybe some of you have seen a movie that was filmed at Willamette Falls about vampires of the Willamette. It's one of these monster sort of movies, and it's one of these things that's way, way, way overboard for several reasons. First of all, when the lamprey come back from the ocean, they're just like Pacific salmon, they don't eat. So you don't have to worry about one of these things sucking blood on you. Secondly, they lose their teeth as they mature in the rivers. But what's amazing about their biology is they hang out for about a year before they spawn. So think about an animal that lives in the sediment, you don't see it for 8, 9 years, goes to the ocean, comes back, then hangs out. We had one live in our lab for 3 years without eating. So just a truly, truly amazing fish. They evolved before jaws evolved. I don't mean the shark, I mean the things that hold our teeth. But like Gabe indicated, they are at risk. And the person that put the fact that lamprey really are at risk will be the next speaker, Dave Close. He published a seminal paper, probably about 20 years ago or so, that indicated that we really do need to care for these animals. And because of that, the tribes have been extremely active in conservation, and several of the federal agencies have too. USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service has developed a lamprey conservation plan. The Fish and Wildlife Service plan encompasses the whole West Coast, so it's not just a very local effort, but lamprey really are truly amazing. The cultural significance is something that I've learned with my association with people like Dave and Gabe and so forth. And they're important medicinally, they're important for nutrition, and they also provide ecological services. But I really didn't know much about the cultural significance of lamprey to people besides the Native Americans. And did you guys know that King Henry I of Britain loved lamprey so much that his physician said, "Don't eat so many because it'll kill you." And he did, and they did. So he actually died stuffing himself with lamprey. Every coronation pie, we would call it more like a cake, they look more like a wedding cake, in England is stuffed with lamprey, including the present Queen Elizabeth cake was stuffed with lamprey. So it's a delicacy. Years ago, we had a representative from the French embassy come to campus to try to figure out how they could import lamprey from here to France because they loved to eat them. One of the recipes they prepared was boiling these things in their own blood infused with chocolate. I don't know what that would be like, but it was a very serious sort of thing to send an embassy member here to figure out how to get our lamprey. At any rate, there's a long heritage that goes along with these, and medicinally, many peoples in the world believe these things have aphrodisiac qualities. It's something that the native peoples around here believe. I once heard one of the cultural people from the Umatilla basically say, when the men are eating lamprey, the women better watch out. I had a Japanese graduate student, they have the same belief. And he went back to Japan, fed his wife lamprey, and she got pregnant, so there's proof. At any rate, these things are important all over the world, and people have the exact same beliefs about them. One thing that we've learned recently, though, is how truly important they are for the environment. And if you think about it, they head upstream further than the Pacific salmon do. And we know how important it is for salmon to bring marine nutrients into the watersheds, which gets up into the forests and the land critters and everybody else. And so we have the lamprey doing the exact same thing, but transporting nutrients even further upstream. And we all know how important it is to rototill your garden. And we think earthworms are pretty important for that. But what rototills the bottom stream, so it turns out that it's juvenile lamprey. So they really, really do provide ecological services. And we're just beginning to understand their important roles. One of the things that I learned from Gabe when he was doing his thesis is how important understanding culture, the traditional ecological knowledge could be actually in recovery planning. There was a place called Rose Lodge that used to be so loaded with lamprey that the native peoples used to congregate there, fish for them, to catch them. They would pluck them off the waterfalls. There's a picture of that at Willamette Falls in a video on a PowerPoint inside. At any rate, the tribes used to congregate there. And unfortunately, the settlers in the area didn't like that, so they actually dynamited the falls and destroyed the lamprey run there. So there are no lamprey above the falls. But traditional ecological knowledge has told us that people congregated there to catch lamprey, so it'd be a wonderful place to restore. So I think that's an area that we really need to pay more attention to, is this ancient knowledge that the original folks around here had. With that said, I think today's a marvelous day because we're honoring a fish by naming Lamprey Creek. But I think more importantly, what we're doing is recognizing forever that these animals are an important part of our environment, for our ecosystem. And so it's to elevate our ecological consciousness. And how important it is to preserve every single cog in the wheel, to have a machine working. They're a very important part of our ecological machine. So with that, I'd like to thank the organizers for putting this together, Gabe, Dave, Jeremy. Thank you so much for making this happen. And it's pretty cool to live in a place that has the only Lamprey Creek in the United States. There is an eel river in California that was named after lamprey. There are other eel rivers in the United States named after lamprey, but there is no other Lamprey Creek, so thank you guys for that.
Tats Eckpa, Inam Hanua Kalautuma, Ian Wanakisha, David Close, Ian Tatokatemke, Himko Capscap. Good afternoon, my friends. And then I was just explaining my name, my traditional name, Himko Capscap, which is a name that goes back to the Salmon River in Idaho, the highlands of the Salmon River. So First of all, I got to tell you, just thinking back, I think it was around 95, 94, 95 when I first stopped here, and I was shopping for master's degree, for a place to do my master's. And I met Hiram and Carl and those guys at the co-op unit, and they said, look no further, you were in the right place. And I was. I'd looked at some other places and I wasn't comfortable, and this seemed to be the right place, and it turned out to be the right place. So together, we were able to work up some of the original plans, conservation, research, and working collaboratively with the Confederate tribes, my tribe, with OSU, and working together, we were able to get it off the ground. And so it was a significant step back then. I kind of cringed when I heard 20 years, but I was like, oh gosh. Anyway, I think some of the importance that's been brought up, people weren't really aware, and maybe a lot of people still aren't aware. Our traditional name for the lamprey is Hasu, which is more up the Snake, Cayuse, Nimipu, Nez and then we have in our area down lower, in our Pendleton area, mid-Columbia, we call Casoyas, and then the other one is Assam. Forgot. And so those are the names of those fish. And one thing I can tell you about this is the significance about those fish. But the significance was brought to me from my elders. And I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, and I was up in Priest Rapids, up above the Hanford Reach, the last free-flowing stretch of the Columbia there. And the elders there had gone down, and some of the folks gone down to Willamette, picked up lamprey, dried them, and they were asking me that I just finished my bachelor's in fisheries resources from the University of Idaho. So everybody was like, okay, now we can really grill one of our people here on this. And so they asked the question, why? Why had the lampreys declined so much during the 70s, 60s, 70s, actually 70s, started declining into the 80s. And they were very curious about why. And they said, you went to the university and you should know, you did fisheries, so let me know, let us hear it. And you know, quite frankly, I had ichthyology, and we dissected a few lamprey, and I didn't have answers. So that prompted me to head back home and start digging around with our elders, and they started talking to me about the importance of these fish and how the declines had been witnessed through harvest and the life cycle, and people had biological knowledge of the fish. So that was really the start, but it wasn't really, it didn't really take off until I met Hiram and Carl and folks from OSU. And so I think that was significant, but the original thing, the cultural significance was very important to our people. And it all goes back to our creation stories and long, it's long ago, right? But it's actually before the people, there was the animals, and the belief was and is that they could communicate to each other. And so they were getting along fine. But then the humans came along, and they seemed to be having problems. They couldn't survive very well, and they needed help. So Haniyawat, or the creator, called a council of the animals to see what they could do for these pitiful beings, right? So they called the council together, and he asked the animals, what can we do? And so the first one to come forward was Nusach, which is the salmon. And he came up first and says, I will help the people, I will teach them how to catch, I will teach them how to prepare, I will teach them how to do all these things. So this knowledge will be given to those people so they can survive. As soon as Nusach came forward, then came all the rest of those fish, their brothers, and they lined up. And then the next came the four-legged ones, Yamash, Wawukyu. So then they lined up and said, we will take care of, we'll show them how to prepare our skins and use them for clothing. We'll teach them how to do these things. And then they lined up, not just Wawukyu or Yamash, but Wawukyu and other four-legged. And then came the roots, and Couch, this specific one that was the leader. And then the rest of the roots followed. And then they made their pledge to help. And then came the berries, huckleberries first. And so then all the rest of the berries lined up behind. So that was the promise that was made in this council. And of course, the reciprocal came back from the people that they would honor these foods. So that's why every spring we have ceremonies, we have songs for these foods, and we celebrate their arrival. And we're not really supposed to be fishing or on the river before we have our ceremony. So we used to have a sucker feast. Some people along the Columbia still have a sucker feast in more of the winter, but the significant time in the spring is when the spring fish are coming back in and the spring roots are coming in to honor their promise. And then we honor those through songs and celebration. So that's really tied into who we are, our culture. And so this is not days gone by. We just had our ceremony just a couple months ago, or a month ago. What is its name? And so it's still significant, and it's not something that's paid. So these foods, when they're collected by our people for ceremony, it's the gift is from Haniawat, the creator, and with the idea of this council that happened long ago in the promise and the pledge. So then these foods are brought in from our people from the heart. And so that's the significance between the fish. And it's not just the salmon. I said Nusa is a salmon, the first one that came up, but I said that there was others that lined up behind. And Lamprey was behind the salmon. So there's all these other ones that are very important, and the sucker as well. So it's not all just about the salmon. It's about the community of these beings. And we still believe that the Waikanash, which is the spirit of the fish, the spirit of the fish, this Waikanash. You can say Waikanash Pum, or the spirit of the salmon people. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the cultural significance you may not have probably heard from our perspective on the east side. And I'd like to thank my little brother for his good words and letting you know that I tricked him into education. And okay. Gotcha. So I spent a lot of my time learning the basics of science here at Oregon State. As mentioned, I continue to work for my tribe in building up programs, a lamprey program, and I started a freshwater mussel program. It's still going today. And we had a 8,000 year long history of shell mittens and So I figured we needed to be thinking more of these other foods that were lined up behind these other front leaders. And so we call it Biologist, which is the leaders. So, and including our people, Biologist chiefs, right? So, starting off, I said I would never go to Michigan, but they made it difficult to say no. I ended up going to Michigan after a few years. They recruited me down. And I worked on a sea lamprey, which Gabe talked about. They're trying to kill them out there, try to control them. But I wanted to make use of the science out there and use the sea lamprey as a surrogate to get to the question of, did they have a stress hormone? Do they have a stress hormone? So that was the question. I tried to dig into it here a little bit, but I had to carry it on. It bothered me for a long time. So I just, kept at it. And I was actually lucky with the team of people I worked with. And the problem was the stress hormone is in such low levels that typically it's much higher levels and it's easier to detect. So anyway, I ended up working there. We actually figured out what the corticosteroid stress hormone was in lamprey. And a lot of the work comes from the basis from Carl's lab, because he had a huge influence on stress in salmon, right? Mr. Stress. Not just in the salmon, but stressing students too. And so that's where that work came from. We were fortunate enough to get it published in Proceedings National Academy of Sciences as a lead on that. And that started off a lot of work trying to understand the biology so we could better manage. If we didn't have the biology and understanding of the foundation, how are we going to manage? So that was always the driving force behind all of our work. And that's what I continue to do. And then also trying to encourage other tribal members to develop that curiosity and develop the education, because we really need that. Because combining that traditional knowledge, combining the education is a powerful tool. And so that's how it all came to be. And I ended up being tricked into moving to Canada, And but I was up there for about 6 years, and at the University of British Columbia Fisheries Center, Department of Zoology, continued doing work, developed the Aboriginal Fisheries Research Unit, and then it was just a little bit much, and my family wanted to come home back to Eastern Oregon, and my boys were pressuring me, and they're 14 and 15, so we ended up deciding to move back home and get back to the res life. And I was elected into office, and still trying to press our fisheries program to move on science, more science. Their motto has been, we need common sense, we don't need science, but we're trying to change that around. You need less than, well, you need common sense, but you also need science. So with that, it's been a great journey, and I'm honored to be here today to dedicate the creek. And as my little brother says, all the hard work that the community has done, and all the past work that the university's done to develop lamprey research is just outstanding. I can't say enough good things. So with that, I think I'll close. I think that's about enough. Katsiaya.
Katsiaya, Dave. I think you actually made it rain. You were up here so long. But Katsiaya means Sahapt. Means thank you in our Sahaptin language. At this point, we're going to close the ceremony, but we're going to head up. Half of us are going to head up to Lamprey Creek. David Eckert is going to lead us up there, and David Harrelson from the Grande tribe will actually bless the creek and say a few good words. For those not up for the hike, we'll be screening Jeremy Monroe's The Lost Fish in the Walnut Community Room. So once again, thank you everybody for coming and being out here and withstanding the elements. Very awesome. Think about Lamprey Creek.